I think part of the challenge that we have to face too is we have to be transparent, open, and honest. And if we're not being transparent, open, and honest about how we're approaching some of these issues and how we're spending money on these advocacy issues, and if ultimately how we're spending money is really, something that is about benefiting us rather than creating a real solution, eventually people are going to call us on that. So transparent, open, and honest. And frankly, it's going to go on for a long time. Again, the rest of our professional careers in this space. There will not be a solution that means that we aren't talking about this issue in our lifetime.
You're listening to Slick Talk, the hospitality podcast, a podcast for those who are in and around the hospitality industry who love, live, and breathe what they do. You can join us for candid and unscripted conversations with hospitality experts and founders as we go deeper into their personal stories while they're sharing their triumphs and trials that got them to where they are today. I'm your host, Will Slickers, and you're listening to an episode of Slick Talk, the hospitality podcast. Now, let's begin. All right, welcome back, Slick Talkers, and I have the one, the only Matt Curtis, who is going to join us today on the podcast to discuss all things regulation, short-term rentals, and many, many more topics. It's been a while since we actually hung out in person. You and I were both at the Skift STR Summit in New York, just a short month or two ago, and a lot was discussed, which kind of sparked this conversation with you and me where I was like, all right, we got to get you on the podcast, talk about some of this stuff, which I'm also surprised we haven't done way sooner because you and I met at VRMA one of the VRMA events a couple years ago. So yeah, long overdue for this conversation ahead. But before we fully jump in, where does it all start for you, Matt?
Yeah, right. I mean, it's amazing. It really is. And thanks for mentioning the VRMA. I think it's such an important asset to the industry, and the VRMA's continued success is so important to the industry. For me, it was really fascinating because I have such an interesting story related to my involvement in the vacation rental space, and I love it dearly. I think that the professional vacation rental space has been a big family, and people know I even get kind of emotional about it. And my wife and my child look at other people from the professional vacation rental space as family members. I also love it because my background in local government, it meshes so well with professional vacation rental managers from vacation destinations, because oftentimes when you think about our friends in places like, North Myrtle Beach or Galveston or, Palm Desert, they are kind of like the chamber of commerce in those towns. They are the business community. They are the ones that are really bringing in the majority of the industry. And so they typically are very engaged with their local government. So it was easy for me to get to know those folks. But, my story was fascinating. I had, this life where I was a right hand to these two mayors in Austin, while Austin was becoming the it city of America, and arguably one of the it cities of the world. And I'd never flown anywhere. I'd never gone anywhere. And worse, the emotional pull to travel was made even more, strong for me because I had been incredibly overweight. I was 500 pounds. And a lot of folks from the vacation rental industry know me and they go, well, you're still big. But I lost almost half my weight. And when I'd gotten down to, not quite half at that point, I was thinking to myself, man, now I can travel. What could I do? Where could I go where I could see the world, but I could still work on local government issues, cities and counties, and the challenges that they're facing and how to help them. And I know it sounds small and trite or whatever, but I lived near the corner of 6th and Lamar, near the headquarters of Whole Foods. I was walking to Whole Foods one day, and across the street was this little business, this little company that I'd seen spring up called HomeAway. And I looked right up at them and I said, man, they're about to face a wrath of local government stuff that's probably going to last the rest of my professional career. And I bet you they'll fly me around the world to go work with local government leaders on these issues. And I walked in and I met with Carl Shepard, and he created a job for me. And that was that. I kind of instantly dove into the issue. And luckily, HomeAway was a different model. And so it was easy for me to feel very comfortable working with local government leaders because they were still that advertising model.
Mhm.
So there wasn't a transaction going through HomeAway for them. And Carl and Brian Sharples were very open to local governments creating rules and regulations, just as long as they understood the industry and how to create rules and regulations that would actually be compliant and be effective.
Mhm.
And so that just meshed well with me. And that's my story. That's how I got into this space. And frankly, it's looking back at it, even when I was still so heavy, vacation rentals were my outlet
Mm.
because what I could do, since I couldn't really fly to destinations, I would drive places like Gulf Shores, Alabama, or Northwest Arkansas, and different places like that. And I would rent a home
Mm.
for 5 days here and 4 days there, and it would give me that ability to satiate that desire that I had to go travel and meet people and really immerse myself in those communities even though I wasn't able to fly. So it's a neat story for me, and now that I have a family and I have a daughter, and I'm able to travel a little bit more easily, even though I'm still a big fella. It's still a small airline seat. I still love doing it, and I love doing using vacation rentals. That's for sure. So does my wife, and my daughter absolutely loves it.
All right, Slick Talkers, sorry to interrupt. As you know, great partners at Minute have sponsored this episode. They sponsor the show. So every episode is filled with amazing minutes. No pun intended. So if you don't know who Minute is or what they do, we see that we have a lot of new Slick Talkers out there in the world. So, one, thank you for tuning into the show. Every listen, every time you hit play means so much to me and to my team. So, thank you. But if you are new, Minute is an amazing noise detection device. Not only do they measure noise decibel levels inside of your vacation homes or your hotels, they actually can detect smoke. Not only that, if you're an outdoor kind of a unique stay person or just have an amazing outdoor amenities for your guests from pools to hot tubs to cookout pads, all the stuff, they have an outdoor sensor that is specifically made for outdoor noise because I didn't know this, but noise outside and noise inside actually makes a difference. So you don't have to worry about constantly making sure, are people partying at your place? Are the cleaners there? Or like whatever, kind of issue might happen, you can get that peace of mind with Minute at your side. So as you grow, Minute will grow with you. They have an amazing team of support and they have an amazing technology from hardware and the software. When the two marry, it's just a beautiful combination. We use Minute in all of our vacation homes and hotels with our management company, and it's the best decision we've made because we are so dispersed and we are so spread out that having Minute just is a necessity for our operations. So get with Minute, go to the link in the show notes, let them know that Will from Slick Talk sent you. They'll give you a sweet deal. And of course, you know the drill. We're back to the episode, and I hope you enjoy. Well, and say, yeah, you're a big guy in the sense of you're tall. I remember having to like rub my neck out a little bit after talking to you in New York. I was like, okay, I was looking up too long. So I can understand how flying, especially at that time of your life, was such a probably just constant pain and hurdle to try to overcome. And I can't imagine. But it's so cool that vacation rentals become this outlet for so many of us in so many different ways, right? Like we all get exposed into vacation rentals and the different you know, different ways and approaches, and some of us through real estate by purchasing a second home, other people by hearing about Airbnb because your parents want you to manage it like a hotel, and you know all this type of stuff, and we all just kind of get sucked into this amazing world. I would love to talk with you about kind of the difference with local governments and how this applies with vacation rentals because coming from a government type job where you're right hand to two mayors and getting to be a part of a lot of political and locally political stuff. To then getting to this world of it's very broad, it's open, right? Vacation rentals don't just exist in one or two cities. It's all over the country, all over Europe. It's not like people have been letting other people into their homes for centuries. So I would love to know like what was that transition like going from actually working with government to then working with Verbo or HomeAway at the time with Carl Shepard and government.
Yeah, it was interesting because, it's funny. I actually started at the exact same time as Airbnb's first head of global government affairs. And she's
Wow.
still a friend of mine. She's a great person. But we were in a horse race, and we were in a horse race that we lost. I think that HomeAway really fought on the side of trying to provide common sense solutions and data
Yeah.
around how to look at this industry. And we were facing another brand that was putting ungodly amounts of money into creating kind of a new concept and a new perception. And so around, my start, we were starting to deal with a really new term that was created mostly for Airbnb around the sharing economy.
Yeah.
Collaborative consumption was the first term. It really started with collaborative consumption, and then it turned into the sharing economy. Collaborative consumption, now that I think of it, it wasn't probably the best term because it sounds like a Thanksgiving feast.
Yeah.
But the sharing economy really became the term of art, and it benefited Airbnb's initial concept of their model. And we were sitting there thinking, well, wait a second. I mean, that's going to be a bigger problem
Mm.
is people casually renting out a back bedroom or a primary home, probably less likely to be compliant with local rules and professional operators. Doesn't mean they didn't have to exist, but
Mhm.
let's approach this from a perspective of reality and with data. But we were up against it. We just didn't have the funding that was put into our argument about the situation. So when I started, it really just became this horse race of us trying to catch up and say, hey, wait a second. There are good outcomes here where you can actually create common sense solutions and compliant regulations for these communities. But we were up against it initially three major cities that were targets for Airbnb: Portland, New York, and Amsterdam. It was the
Mm.
international example where they were really promoting, hey, let's allow a primary only model, only primary homes. And it was fascinating because, I don't think I ever heard Carl Shepard or Brian Sharples ever say a bad word against primary home rentals,
Mhm.
but there certainly was a thought that only allowing primary home rentals in those communities would mean that families traveling with small kids, they might not feel comfortable in staying in somebody else's house with
Mhm.
somebody else's stuff. Doesn't always mean it's always that way, but probably a little bit easier with somebody who's professionally operating a place that is sanitized and set aside as a true open, accommodation for a traveling family.
Yeah.
And then I think also, business travelers and that sort of thing. But we were, a wildly underfunded little scrappy outfit trying to make that argument. And unfortunately, we really did lose that initial fight.
Mhm.
I think that even when we had really great engagement with those cities, man, it's hard when another company is spending millions on marketing in those cities and actually doing true lobbying where they're actually donating politically, which is something we never did,
Mm.
but donating politically to people's campaigns, putting on press events or community events where maybe they might be funding get-togethers for hosts. And so all of a sudden now you have a get together for a host and you invite your city council out, and it looks like, boy, that's the thing to do. And the vacation rental managers, the professional managers in those towns are sitting there saying, "Hey, what about us?
Mhm.
We're not a host, we're a professional manager." Again, not that you couldn't create a atmosphere where both could be allowed, but
Yeah.
certainly there was a promotion by Airbnb to only allow one model.
Yeah. What would you like? I know Airbnb obviously since that time has completely shifted, right? Like they're totally open to unique stays, castles, up
Mm.
houses, and, full home rentals and encouraging full home. We saw a little bit of a push back to shared spaces again, but I kind of feel like it's quieted down. I don't know how well received a shared space has been post COVID, especially in more blue states or cities and stuff like that. I just think a lot of people are still more cautious about, sharing space with others and especially strangers. So I would
Oh
love to
yeah.
know like what's your kind of take now on the current landscape with the regulatory sector with, kind of a combined space of like hosts that are renting out whole homes, but they're not using a PMS and they're not distributing on other OTAs, maybe one or two if they can and do like a calendar sync. But most hosts that I know try to just they stick on Airbnb, but they have 5 homes, 10 homes, right?
Right.
So yeah, I would love to know what your kind of current look is on the today's landscape.
It's so funny. I think feel like sometimes I say things that sound anti-host, and
But
it's unfortunate because what I really mean is I think that we should be looking at it more holistically and allowing all things.
mhm,
But because of the side of the argument that I tended to land on, I do sound anti-host. But it's funny. My daughter and I just came back from Portland.
yeah,
And Portland, for the longest time, was the example city that I gave when I would speak publicly about short-term rental regulations. And I would be in a room, man, I'd be at the US Travel Association's conference, ESTO. There'd be
yeah,
1,000 people in the room. I think when I spoke at South by Southwest, I mean, that was easily about 1,000 people. And just because of using like my showmanship abilities and my 1993 Denton Citywide Karaoke champion, I could lure these people in. And man, I'd probably tell them the story about my weight loss or whatever.
yeah,
And I'd really have them captured. And sometimes you just know you have an audience, right? And then I tell them the story of Portland. It's got to be 2013, probably somewhere thereabouts. Oh, that can't be right. 2017, maybe. And we had taken my child there, and she was only a handful of months old, maybe 11 months old, something like that. And we walked into a beautiful craftsman home in Ladd's Addition, which is such a beautiful neighborhood. I love staying there. And my daughter, in that little tottering phase of life, teeter totters around an L-shaped couch when we first walked into the house.
mhm,
My wife and I are still, pulling in the luggage and stuff like that, and kind of looking around and seeing a lot of other personal effects around in a house where we typically would not stay in someone's personal home. And not everybody's personal hosted home is like this.
mhm.
But my daughter teeter totters around that L-shaped couch, and there she was, beautiful little kid, 11 months old, if I remember correctly. And she slides her hand in between the couch cushions and she pulls out a used toothbrush, and she
Ooh,
immediately goes to stick it in her mouth, and my wife
yeah,
dives across the couch and rips it out of her hand. And I've told that story before where I have a whole crowd lean back almost in fear, like if Godzilla had just come out on the screen. I mean, they're like freaked out. Oh my
yeah,
God, I can't believe you just went there. But my point is that we all have an old toothbrush laying under a couch or some similar situation like that. And so that's where I kind of say, there's a comfort level for some people where it's okay to be in a house
mhm,
where, you're there with other people's personal effects. But for people with young kids and other stuff with that, not always the case. I will say I've never told this part of the story. In that same house, my wife reminds me that we found a lot of old school straight razors that were kind of handy. And so kind of making sure that my daughter couldn't get her hands on those and some other things. And then we went and stayed there last week, and we stayed with a woman who happily admitted that she was flying under the radar.
oh wow,
And so here we were back in Portland. Now it's 2024. We're staying in somebody who's operating illegally. And, the house had a couple little weird problems with it from a professional operation perspective. We found out after about a day, the end of the first day, that the refrigerator was broken,
oh
a
wow,
couple of other issues like that, that I don't think you always find with homes that are the most professionally operated homes.
yeah,
That said, that's that extreme story. And again, those are anecdotal stories. And I always talk to local government leaders about, hey, let's talk about things through the lens of data.
mm,
But those are some anecdotes, right?
mhm,
And eventually, somebody smart once said, you have enough anecdotes, you created some data. Now, I would say that, I truly believe that if cities aren't allowing a mix of both the hosted stay, primary home model rentals, where it's your property or you're on property, maybe it's an ADU or a duplex or something like that, garage apartment. But then also the professional model. And I think for bigger cities, I'm a huge fan of what we were trying to call in the industry the flex model, kind of the CASA, Midhouse, the Guild
yeah,
model, because I think that really speaks well to business travelers who are traveling for a longer period of time. I think you got to allow for a mix of those different different models.
Mhm.
And then I think you can create good regulation around it that allows those good actors to exist. I've never met a single person in this industry that has said, hey, let's do something that allows the bad actors to
Mhm.
exist. So you can do things that allow the good actors through a streamlined approach through regulations, ordinances, paperwork, and that sort of thing. And then you find ways to enforce against bad actors. And I think there are great solutions out there. We've built some of those working with some different communities. We certainly have done a lot of research around that. And I'm excited for the future of the industry. I'm excited of how it's going to lay into the tourism industry and how it's going to bring more tourism dollars to so many communities that need it.
Yeah.
And frankly, I'll tell you something that you don't hear often enough. I'm anxious to see how the hotel industry innovates.
Mhm.
Haven't quite innovated yet from what I can see, but they're gonna. So eventually you're gonna have a hotel label that has a better coffee maker in the room.
Mhm.
I mean, good Lord. Do we really have to drink those little terrible off-brand one-shot Keurig coffees when we're in? I mean, give us a better coffee option. I used to love Marriott's kind of take on creating an experience, but when they had the lady check in at the hotel and she went to that cool little bar that has like 4 seats and met a friend and cleaned the glass and then sat around that little kind of fire pit that they have outside that has the kind of fake fire in it with the rocking chairs.
Yeah.
No one ever does that. It was like putting cosmetics on a pig. It wasn't really creating the experience travelers need. Now, I appreciate they were thinking that way.
Mhm.
So now what are they going to do to actually think, all right, how do we create a better model from the hotel side to create a better experience for travelers? I'm excited about that as well.
Yeah, me too. And your coffee comment is hilarious because it's the exact reason, not to like plug anything, but the exact reason why Michael Golden, myself, and Jonathan Wicks from Well and Good created our own coffee brand. So we literally legit created, we were in 1,000 homes day one. We're like, all right, no one's using good coffee. And if they are, it's like a one pod or whatever. So yeah,
Yeah.
exact same reason. But Matt, you bring up a lot of good points. And I kind of we can go a couple different directions, and I want to maybe start with regulatory as a whole because I remember Matt Landau, Dana Lubner did a season or a podcast called "How to Save Your Vacation Rental Business," right? And the question or the thesis was, what is like we're trying to define fair regulation because banning completely is not the option or not a great option. Wild Wild West, leaving it open for anybody and everybody, allowing bad actors is not the option either. So, what is fair regulation to you? Is a question I'd love to pose.
Yeah, right. I mean, so there's 23,000 local governments in America. And I truly do believe they are unique.
Hmm.
Every one of them is one of a kind. Falls, Pennsylvania, outside of Scranton, is a great destination, but it's completely different than Manzanita, Oregon. And so, you know, how do you create regulations to speak to those? Plano, Texas is talking about regulations a lot right now. I mean, that's kind of a, suburb, a working sort of suburb of the Dallas Fort Worth area. And it's obviously not Galveston. So I think what we have to do is you have to realize that communities are going to create their own regulations. Even in the states, we've had people go down this path of thinking we're going to create statewide preemption ordinances. Now, for several years, that became pretty clear. Even when you look at the states that have a quote pre-ordinate or a preemption ordinance, preemption regulation, like Florida, sometimes they often get pretty darn watered down.
Mhm.
And I've seen more of them not pass at all, even in very property rights minded states. So I don't think that's going to be the path we're going to go. I think we're going to see more folks kind of do what has happened historically in American communities, which is allow local governments to make local rules. That said, I think we have to do a great job of educating people on what good local regulations mean. Part of that is I think we need to do a better job of educating them on the industry and letting them know you probably want to look at all the different models that exist depending on your community. Is the flex model, Casa, Midhouse, the Guild, Sonder, are they ever going to go into Falls, Pennsylvania? No. I don't even know if they go into Scranton, but
Mhm.
would they go into, Pittsburgh and Philadelphia? Sure. Okay. Then we have to create an ordinance that speaks to a multifamily, dense, kind of more commercial, mixed use oriented property like that. But for more of our friends who are kind of in traditional vacation destinations, we're probably talking a lot about either single family homes or multifamily properties that are kind of in those kind of beach towns or maybe ski towns.
Yeah.
And I think getting people to read, we said this years ago, and we wrote a document that became the basis of a 2012 US Conference of Mayors best practice policy statement that said start with registration and make registration easy. Get people into the program.
Yeah.
So starting with registration, and then I think making sure that people have adequate levels of insurance coverage, make payment of taxes easy. Don't make anything burdensome or onerous. Because one of the things we mentioned in that statement is onerous and burdensome rules are only going to result in driving the activity underground. And that
Exactly.
has proven itself to be true time and time and time again. So making the regulations easy is the best first step. If you want to recognize that there might be a need in some communities, again, let's say Plano, Texas, to have some density limitations, there are some different examples of what you can look at to do that. I'm not a big fan of density limitations by distance. So saying that a short-term rental can't be within 1,000 feet of another short-term rental, I
Mm.
think that becomes unimaginably burdensome. But maybe limiting what I think one community did so smartly in 2013, limiting the census tract to a certain percentage of the total number of short-term rentals that could be registered in that tight little census tract, which is a very small little geographic or government designed boundary. I thought that was smart because then you could say, okay, we're okay with, this certain percentage of homes total in that census tract can be registered as short-term rental. I do believe that it assuages so many fears and concerns from local governments to neighborhoods, frankly, even to good operators, to have a 24-hour point of contact who can respond within a reasonable amount of time.
Yeah.
What the time is, again, it's going to change. Mount Pocono, I'm really stuck on the Scranton area. My
Yeah.
family is from there, but Mount Pocono, Pennsylvania, they might be okay with, a 2-hour response time just because of the topographical dynamics of that community, the mountains, the drive time, and that sort of thing. Whereas maybe, Myrtle Beach, California, or Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, might say we want maybe more like a 30 minutes, or 45-minute response time. And then, of course, I think technology is helping us out so much. I'm a huge fan of the software compliance tools that are out there. Some of them I don't think are as transparent, open, and honest with kind of how they're approaching the industry and the understanding of the industry and their involvement in the industry as others. I'm a big fan of one that is exceptionally promoting of good actors, of fair regulation, and has an unbelievably high success rate. And what they do is they scrape the different websites of who's operating. And guess what? Again, I haven't met an operator who said, yeah, I'm operating above board. I'm okay. Those software compliance tools are going after bad operators who are trying to hide under the radar.
Yeah.
And I think what we've seen in our studies and surveys and different virtual site visits that we've done around the country with planning directors and compliance directors is you don't create a high fee to register the property, create a higher fine structure or progressive fine structure to go after bad actors.
Yeah.
And recognizing that, hey, sometimes a fine on the first round, it's something that can be addressed. That doesn't have to be the highest fine. But maybe if it continues to be a problem, then you make it a progressive fine structure so that third fine is a whammy.
Yeah. That's my biggest complaint with anything government related, specifically local, right? Like even just registering your car at the DMV. It's like, man, the website sucks. Everyone's grumpy. It's not easy. You're like, I don't even know where to go. Show up to one
Yep.
DMV and they're like, oh, you got to go to this DMV. You go to that DMV. There's, oh, no, you actually can't do it at this one. You have to go to your county DMV to do this. And it's just constantly chaotic. So, like for short term rentals, vacation rentals, whatever we want to call it, yeah, creating the process to be simple and easy. Apply, get a permit, low barrier to entry and price, make it somewhat sticky. So it's obviously like, not like a slap on the hand type of fee, but it's like, okay, like if I'm paying for this, like I want to make sure I'm by board. I don't want to get those other fines, A, B, and C, like you were just kind of talking about that tier. So I think that's great. I would love kind of One of the things that I think really struck me when you and I were meeting and kind of chatting in New York was your conversation actually at Skift and the kind of argument you guys had against, well, it's short-term rentals and vacation rentals harm the housing supply and fair housing prices and all this other stuff. I would love for you if you could maybe give us a glimpse into kind of what you and the mayor were talking about on stage, because your guys' argument was, it made so much sense, right? Like it just clicks. And I think not enough people hear stuff like that when it comes to the actual fair housing and all the other
Oh yeah.
type of, that type of rebuttal. So I'd love if you
You
could
know,
go into that. All right, I'm back. Sorry to interrupt, but you have to hear about our partners and friends at Hostfully. Not only are they an amazing property management software, they're an amazing team. I've been friends and partners with Hostfully for over 4 years now, and it's been an amazing 4 years. I can't complain because as I continue to grow my business with our property management company, they continue to update and grow their products and features within the Hostfully platform, and it just gets better over time. So with us, we have a unified inbox, we have amazing marketplace, not only for the rest of our tech stack to integrate, which is awesome because they work with so many people, but then the third piece is the distribution is built in. So you don't have to fully rely on a channel manager. You can actually rely on the amazing integrations that Hostfully has with Airbnb, Verbo, Booking.com, Marriott, Homes and Villas, you name it. They have what you need in order to get your inventory, your properties to the right people. It's kind of a no-brainer, but I'm going to tell you this anyways. You're going to get a special deal with Hostfully with the link in the show notes. You'll just have to let them know if you love the product and then just tell them that we'll send you. So that way you can get that amazing Slick Talk deal. And of course, we're back to the episode. Thanks for tuning in, and I hope you enjoy.
yeah. I mean, I think the first thing to acknowledge is we have an unbelievable housing crisis everywhere. Really, it feels like in the world right now, certainly in the United States.
Mhm.
And I think there's a very strong reason for that. And I love, again, a story sometimes I've told with this, but here we were at Skift, and I was up on stage with the mayor of Columbia, South Carolina. He's a good friend. I know him through the United States Conference of Mayors. He is a tremendous leader amongst the mayors, has been a committee lead with some of the different government groups that we're part of. And we got asked that question about housing. And, it's so challenging right now because what has happened is really, frankly, been a 60-year long mistake in the United States, especially. Let's keep it to the US.
Yeah.
We started to trend away from building new homes for first time home buyers. So, uh, a study came out a few years ago called the Reno study that was really fascinating, that kind of showed that what we have started to see from a lot of different home construction companies is a focus on really probably it was a type of home that, maybe only people in their late 40s and 50s could invest in, like really big and nice homes. But first time homes weren't being built. Type of housing category called missing middle was
Mm.
just totally left off the table. Affordable housing means different things to different people. So I tend to
Yeah.
stay away from that phrase. If I do, I tend to make sure people understand. I usually mean government subsidized homes for people that might be coming out of like kind of homelessness, or maybe there's other reasons why there's a purposeful and very important policy goal to help get them into housing. So that type of housing, affordable housing, has been a struggle for a long time for a lot of people to continue to maintain that. And of course, couple that with our increasing, kind of homelessness challenge as we've seen state hospitals close over the last 40 years around the country when we shut down federal funding of state hospitals in 1984, 85. All that kind of stuff happened together. But then I love this. In 2016, our outgoing president in September, I believe it was, maybe August, issued a great paper, a kind of a wag of the finger to American local governments, which, it's okay. I'm a local government guy. I don't mind being challenged every now and then.
Yeah.
But what he pointed out is he said, hey, we're hearing a lot about the housing crisis. And guess what is a ubiquitous thing in all of your 23,000 communities around the country? You haven't changed your land use practices in 60 years. We were still operating with these 60-year-old land use codes that hadn't changed. So we do have a housing crisis, right? And all that pinch is making people really freaked out. They can't afford the home they want. They've got friends and family that can't buy a home. And it's a real issue. And we have to acknowledge that. We have to go after real policies to solve it. But in the meantime, we were able to point to an issue, a boogeyman, if you will, and say, look, that's the problem right there,
Mhm.
those short term rentals. We do a lot of housing studies. My firm does a lot of economic impact studies, housing studies, cost of compliance studies. And of the housing studies we've worked on, most of them, you're looking at towns where the short term rental population of homes is somewhere between 0.01% of the total housing stock to maybe places that are real vacation oriented, real vacation like rental towns where the total housing stock is in the neighborhood of like 4 or 5%. But it isn't, you know, it isn't 30%, it isn't 25%. So it's not short term rentals. It's hard to point to and say that's the reason we have a housing crisis.
Mm.
Furthermore, what I would say now is looking back at all the cities that have instituted bans and moratoriums and heavy restrictions that have been a practical ban of short term rentals, you haven't seen the affordability matrix change. You haven't suddenly created affordable housing.
Yeah.
So we have to really address this for the issue that is. It's okay to create good regulations that will achieve compliance for your local communities, and that can be done. And that's what we work on all the time. But if we do have a housing crisis, we have to address that too. All of this kind of merges together with something that we, as an industry, I think the vacation rental industry needs to get, and the short term rental stakeholders in all cities and sizes, of all different sizes, have got to get involved with. Talk a lot in this industry about being involved in advocacy.
Mhm.
I think we have to start thinking of ourselves as like chambers of commerce
Mm.
because this issue and different either regulations or engagement about how we're involved in the impact of of the economy of our communities and our regions, it isn't going to go away. And so we have to be down at the table and helping to build real solutions. Now, so many of our owners and managers don't have time for that. And I'm a big proponent of telling them, okay, then you got to hire a professional.
Mm.
I mean, I used to say all the time, get organized into volunteer groups. And sometimes that works for a period of time and then they disband. But the easiest thing is pool your money and hire a professional. Get involved with your chamber of commerce, real estate council, the different groups that kind of are focused on this issue so that you can create those real solutions because pounding pots and pans and say, hey, we're not really part of the affordable housing problem. It's just not helping people address their emotional response.
Yeah.
And we have to do both. And we have to recognize, I think, that regulations should exist, but let's create the good ones.
Mhm.
And then let's address the concerns that people have, especially on things like housing.
Yeah. Really good point. And I don't really want to play devil's advocate, but I do want to kind of bring up like a counter side or like maybe just a counter question for you. Trying to figure out how to word that, but we'll figure it out. I back in my hometown, I joined the Chamber of Commerce because I was getting started my vacation rental management business and wanted to get more leads and be part of the community and partner up with other businesses and do all the things. And my experience with the Chamber of Commerce was everyone in there on the board and president or whatever the structure was has been doing it for a very, very long time, been in the town for a very, very, very long time. And I would almost say I looked at young people coming in as a threat. They wanna change
Mhm.
everything, they wanna start over, they wanna ruin all the work we've done, and then my kinda argument was, "Well, I don't feel like you guys have done anything, like, what really do we do?" Right? And then getting into government and advocacy through this industry now more and going through stuff like what happened in Denver, where they're trying to pass that bill to turn into corporate taxing, basically. Advocacy is so hard because it is so new, it's so different, we're all doing kind of full-time jobs, and then that's why there's professionals like you. But there's also, you made a statement earlier in the beginning of the episode about like the success of VRMA, right? An organization like VRMA is super important. Well, right now, I don't feel like VRMA is doing
Yeah.
much to better themselves or better the industry, and it's kind of going downhill. But then you have the traditional old guard and people that I won't mention who think it's the best thing invented since sliced bread. right? So
Yep.
it's like, okay, where are we going wrong? Like, am I just seeing it this way because of an experience, or do you actually see that this is kind of changing? Because I would love to be more involved in a local chamber of commerce or some kind of organization that helps actually fight unfair regulation. I'm all for paying a fee and registering and doing that, but it just doesn't seem to jive within the community of short-term rental and vacation rental. So, do you think they're like, am I wrong or am I crazy or
No, no,
yeah,
no. With so many different groups that are out there, you certainly do see those groups like chambers of commerce that can get a little bit, I
key.
don't know, territorial or
Yeah,
whatever. I'm also, you can always remember associations of realtors as well, which I think are a really good outlet. I do like the associations of realtors myself, just because I've worked with so many to conduct housing studies,
yeah.
and they really do approach things from that perspective of data. I've really enjoyed that. Chambers, of course, are also focused on other issues to your local economy, and it could be a little bit more broad. It just depends on the community.
Mm,
And then I'm always a big fan of you can start your own. I love going to an association of realtor or a chamber. I've done this with several different short-term rental stakeholders around the country and said, "Hey, I know you as a total body might not want to be involved in this issue, entirely. Could we create like a project within the organization that's focused on this?"
mm,
And they've blessed that concept before. So that could be something, but I do think aligning yourself with a larger group that has some existing resources and knowledge of how local government works in those communities. Funny quick aside, and then I'm going to speak to some of the other things you mentioned.
yeah, yeah.
Uh, I have had, but in the past, some stakeholders who have called me before from the industry, and they say, "Man, we're going down today. We're going to bang on pots and pans at City Hall," and I'll do my best to try to talk to them, only to go down to City Hall and find out that City Council wasn't meeting that day.
Mm,
And I think it's because not all of us actually follow, local government. Not everybody can be the big city nerd that I am, right?
yeah.
So it's just not in their. So I do think aligning yourself with people who might know be that space is really good. There are plenty of examples out there. There's a good one that I'm thinking of from, I think it's the sixth largest city in the United States, where a woman has organized a great volunteer group, and they've done a wonderful job for a couple of years now. But in the 23,000 local governments, I set up about 50 or so coalitions before I left HomeAway, and then when I was working with the VRMA, we did some really big ones around the country. Most of those eventually just dissolve, and I do we all change over time. My theory on that now is because you can't count on full-time volunteer support forever. Now, you asked about the VRMA. So I started this conversation talking about how I love the VRMA. I think it's such a
Yeah.
great family. And I do think it unfortunately suffered from a really just terrible leadership challenge at one period of time.
Mhm.
And it's not fair to the board. They are unbelievable people. I love them and I count on them as brothers and sisters. They're wonderful, wonderful people. And they work so hard and they do it for free.
Mm,
But I think unfortunately he got into it with one executive director. COVID, you could maybe argue that we had one for, I think we had one for about 11 months that didn't quite work out. But I think that was more of just the challenge of COVID, and everybody was
yeah.
scrambling to address a lot of issues. But after COVID, or as COVID was winding down, the executive director I think we got into seems to be universally regarded as having done a pretty terrible job with the organization. And the stories and the feedback that you hear is just breaking. And the only thing I kind of live with is knowing that there will be a rebuild of that organization. But I do think that traditionally the volunteer led board that works so terribly hard, and the kind of volunteer leadership that has been in that organization, is doing things for the right reason. Now, there's a couple of funny people in there, that have really strong opinions and seem to have a lot of sway, that hover around the association. And I guess they just have really strong opinions. I don't know how else to speak to it, but overall, I think the association is important. And I think our goal for the short-term rental industry in the country, I think it should be the goal for local government leaders. I know that's going to sound nutty, but local government leaders and short-term rental stakeholders is a very strong VRMA.
Mhm.
Because if the Vacation Rental Management Association can fly in and help, I mean, I think about this all the time, and frankly, how it used to be.
Yeah.
And I was working with the Vacation Rental Management Association, and you'd have, the mayor of Clarksville, Tennessee, call and say, "Hey, I have a problem, and I need help creating regulations and getting people aligned." We would swoop in, help. Traverse City, Michigan, and so many other destinations you could think of. When we would get that call, we would swing in and we would do everything we could to help. The outcomes weren't always perfect. It was a
Yeah.
wildly underfunded association, and again, mostly volunteer efforts. But that's what was needed at the time. And maybe just again, it's all the stories you hear that executive director just was the wrong person and had very bad ideas of where to take that organization.
Yeah, I know some of those personalities you're talking about, and it seems like it's just become an echo chamber at some point. Because I don't know cities, that think, "Oh, okay, like short-term rentals and vacation rentals, man, we're going through some stuff, housing crisis, da, da, da. Let's call the VRMA, like, let's call
Right.
them," right? Like, I don't know any city that even knows that there probably exists. I'm sure they're thinking, "Oh, there's gotta be some organization out there," but it just
It's it's
seems.
it's unbelievably heartbreaking. There was a
Yeah,
time that so these, all cards on the table.
yeah,
There was a time we had this great executive director. He's wonderful named Mike Copps. Guy was amazing. We all loved him. And I think that a lot of the board would love to see him come back.
mm,
And so here you have this great executive director who was running the thing. And I may have started my company on my own by then. But Mike said, "Hey, you go to all these government conferences and these convenings of government leaders and stuff like that. What would you think we should do?" And I plotted a course for him. And I said, "Here's exactly how you should be involved." And he said, "Let's do it." And even found some funding to make it happen for the little bit of funding that we needed.
yeah,
We were present and we were definitely building that rapport with government leaders around the country. And we were really, kind of engaged and at the table. And then I think even picking, you're 100% right. I mean, Palm Desert did not know to call the Vacation Rental Management Association. But what we did was, I guess I would have been the government affairs chair. I would have said, "Hey, let's call Palm Desert." And that's what we would have done.
yeah,
And we called Palm Desert, we would have engaged ourselves. I think we were becoming a resource. Unfortunately, I just think that vision was lost along the
yeah,
way. It was really, really unfortunate. I don't think there's a single person on the board who doesn't think that vision should be implemented. And I think they all recognize there was just a bad executive director. And
yeah,
if I understand correctly, that executive director was asked to
yeah,
leave.
yeah.
So I'm sure their next one will be guided by them to kind of re-engage on that level. And I think again, going back to that statement I made earlier, I think local government leaders and vacation rental and short-term rental stakeholders want a very strong vacation rental management association.
Agreed. And for the listeners that know that maybe I do go after VRMA a little too hard sometimes, it's all out of love in the sense of my first industry conference was VRMA San Antonio 2021. So like for me, it's a like you said, it's almost a family type reunion. It's a Super Bowl. We all gear up for international, right? Like it's a big event and it's something I look forward to every year because I know for a fact I'm gonna have a good time with people that I love to do business with, to hang out and
Mhm.
get to know. And so that, thankfully that all happened through VRMA. But I think the reason why I'm so hard on it now is because it was such a great pivotal moment in my business, in my career in the industry that to see it the way it is now, it's almost heartbreaking. I don't want us to accept this type of standard for an organization.
Yeah.
And, thankfully I'm friends with some people that are going to be, nominated to go be new board members and be a part of the change and younger and new full of ideas and different types of business models and experience and markets. So I do hope that it turns around. But I actually, Matt, want to ask you in the sense of working, you're talking about being at the table, right? And like you're working with these local governments and stuff. How hard would that be with the type of change or turnover when a new term happens or a new election era? And like, tell me, do you ever feel like it was one step forward, two steps back type situation whenever that would happen? Or is that not really a big of a thing in policies and kind of reputations and relationships would kind of still blossom?
Now, are you talking about when you create like a regulation in a community, but the dynamics of that local leadership can change? Is that what you were referring to?
That or just even trying to, like, get in your foot in the door, and then all of a sudden a local government change happens, and then you got to, like, start all over from square one. I would love to, yeah, either one would be great.
Yeah, it's interesting. I did not give enough credit to the two mayors that I worked with here in Austin because while Austin was really becoming, and frankly, I think arguably still is the it city of the United States, and if not the it city of the world, I was a little bit worried about it losing its it status recently. And then a couple of new headquarters announced they're moving here. And Glenn Powell's hitman,
Yeah.
local Glenn Powell took off and everything else like that. And Austin still seems to have that it. And at the US Conference of Mayors this year, I even had some other mayors from some other cities that are often bantied about being the new it cities even say to me, yeah, we're no Austin. So I was lucky though, because those two mayors really let me be the public face of the city
Yeah.
at so many government conferences and things like that. So when I have over the years, whether in my role at HomeAway or now consulting on my own, gone to places like, Paris or again, called the city manager in Palm Desert. Luckily, I've just gotten to a place where my phone calls get answered. And I don't think my mom ever thought that my 6.5 years at film school would ever get to this point. I don't think they ever thought I was ever going to not do anything. And arguably, I don't think, maybe I haven't accepted this weird little space.
Yeah.
But I do get my phone calls returned, which is great. And I do, connect with these people as somebody who is of government, and I consult with so many governments on so many different functions and work with them in some of the different convenings where we get together and work on policy solutions and best practices and model examples. But to your point, I definitely also knew in 2010 when I walked in to talk to Colonel Shepard that this would be an issue that I would be fighting or dealing with or addressing or
Yeah.
whatever, working on for the rest of my life because of the point you just made. City managers are going to change, city's attorneys are going to change, council dynamics are going to change, and they're going to go back and tinker with regulations again and again. Now, that's good for me as somebody who wants to work in that space, and I love it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it goes back to that point I was making earlier about can our people create more like chambers of commerce? And I say that, Will, I just want to make a kind of a point. I was on stage with some young people, and they're real involved in advocacy. I always call them like young people in hoodies, with who want to get down to City Hall and they watched a couple of seasons of The West Wing and they think they know how government works.
Yeah.
And they were going on about how this is a war. And I sat there and thought, man, you can't do that. I mean, you're going to go down and develop a partnership with that code compliance director, the planning director, the city council. You need to create a solution, and you can't look at it as a war. And I said, so let's talk about it as a chamber of commerce, where you're at the table and you're going to have to consistently be engaged and be helping. And sure, you got to look at different tactics of how to do that. Some might be
Yeah.
legal, some might be as in a legal approach, some might be looking at things from like creating housing solutions or registration solutions, different things like that. But you got to be at the table, and you got to frankly be at the table consistently, probably for the rest of your career. That's why I think of it as a chamber of commerce. And I got through giving this great speech, and again, I thought I had the 1,000 people in the room, captured, and the couple of people in hoodies at the dais up there with me turned to the crowd and yelled, "It's a war!" And I just think that's dumb because wars end, and this isn't going to end.
Mm.
We will be continuing to engage on how to create effective short-term rental policies for the rest of our careers in the space. And so I think we need to hunker down and understand how to do that. We were talking a little bit about some of the bigger personalities around the VRMA.
Mhm.
I think part of the challenge that we have to face too is we have to be transparent, open, and honest. And if we're not being transparent, open, and honest about how we're approaching some of these issues and how we're spending money on these advocacy issues, and if ultimately how we're spending money is really, something that is about benefiting us rather than creating a real solution, eventually people are going to call us on that.
Yeah.
So transparent, open, and honest, and frankly, it's going to go on for a long time. Again, the rest of our professional careers in this space.
Totally agree. Totally agree.
I'll give you a quotable quote. There will not be a solution that means that we aren't talking about this issue in our lifetime.
Yeah. So you and I will be doing this type of conversation quite often, I'm assuming. Yeah. It's unfortunate because, like, well, one, it is good for you, right? That's a great industry to be in if you're able to just be there, be constant, consistent, the way you've been over, what, the 14 years since you started with, HomeAway. But then also it's, when are it just seems to me like, especially with the turnover, right? Like, city directors and planners and all these other things, right? Like you said the comment of people are going to go back and play with regulation. And it feels almost, maybe this is me being, just thinking of personally, not as a professional. It feels like a slap to the face almost to the taxpayer, right? Like if you're paying taxes locally and doing all your stuff and being a good citizen, and then you're hearing like they're just drumming up stuff that doesn't need to be drummed up, and because one person has an affinity for Airbnbs because he thinks that they're the devil or whatever type of regulation, it just feels like a waste of time. So I guess the question I want to like pose to you is, do you think government will get more efficient and stop wasting time sometimes, or do you think it's like going to be a consistent thing because people feel like they have to put their stamp, they have to put their mark on something, right? And it's just,
Yeah.
maybe, I don't know, maybe that's just the way I've looked at it through past experiences and getting more involved in my current city now than I have in the past and other stuff. But yeah, just almost kind of be like, can we just focus on change and sustaining a good outcome and not playing with something that's not broken?
Oh, certainly. I mean, and I got to give it to government. I think they
Yeah.
have grown substantially and have understood the space. 23,000 governments.
Yeah.
I can't place that on absolutely everybody, but I think for the most part, you've seen incredible growth and understanding of this industry and how to create effective regulations around it. And I do think people are really working towards doing that. But imagine going back to where we started with this conversation.
Yeah.
They started with being told a story that wasn't true.
Mhm.
And so I think what has set us back for these 14 years is the fact that they heard that the best solution for them would be to only allow people renting from their primary home, their back bedroom or their whole home, primary home, and that would be more compliant. And what I've always asked, policymakers about that, including a guy who's a great friend of mine, the former mayor of Portland now, Charlie Hales, is, do you truly think that someone casually doing this out of their own home would somehow or another be more compliant if they're only doing it 15, 20, 35 days a year, that they're going to choose to go down and fill out paperwork and pay taxes? And did you think that when you said it was their primary home, that somehow or another there would be less compliance issues, as in noise and nuisance issues,
Yeah.
because it's their home? But what if they're not there? Like, where are they?
Mhm.
And if they have gone out of town for the weekend, how are they governing the home?
Mhm.
So, really does go back to, I think it all started on a myth. And in 2014, I think it was, the US Conference of Mayors was in Baltimore. And I talked to Brian Chesky a handful of times prior to that. Airbnb was still a size where I could email him and, chat with him.
Mhm.
Now, those days are long gone. I think he wouldn't know who I was anymore. But in 2014, I walked up to him at the Conference of Mayors and I said, "Hey, Brian, there's a problem here. You're creating this myth and it's now propagating to all these cities. And all these cities are going to start, regulating based on this myth. And we're going to spend decades trying to fix the problem."
Yeah.
And Brian never stopped tweeting or texting. He was on his phone the whole time he was talking to me. And he looked up and he just shrugged.
Hmm.
And, I just don't think he cared. And I think it's unfortunate because I think if he had thought about it for a minute, he would realize that long term, that wasn't in his best interest. And I got to give it to Carl Shepard. He told him that in 2010, 2011. We had a summit of all the large online travel agency leaders in New York that I facilitated. And Carl really read them all the riot act, that we
Mm.
had to be transparent, open, and honest. We had to provide real solutions for these governments to create good outcomes. And I think because they weren't, give it to HomeAway at the time, I think we were, but because the others weren't, I think they created this problem that we are going to deal with for a couple of decades. But I think over time it'll get easier. It'll be these little tweaks and tinkers that we'll face. We probably have like a city manager who might come in Hilton Head and say, hey, I want to change the 24-hour point of contact to somebody who will respond in half the amount of time,
Mhm.
or maybe make sure that the person responding has some type of, kind of ownership of property, stuff like that. It'll be those little nips and tucks here and there, but over time, I think, we'll probably find a little bit of balance. I do think some of our louder voices at the VRMA, again, I mentioned it earlier, wanted to see all the states pass state preemption. And I walked into a couple of those meetings with state leaders around about 2015, 2017, maybe 2015. And it became very clear that property rights minded state representative, state senator would say, I'm all for limiting how cities can regulate, which is funny because it's typically from a party that never wants to limit how cities can regulate things. But they would say this, they're all for limiting how cities could regulate this activity. But they go, I just don't want one near my house.
Yep.
It became very clear they were not going to pass state preemption and that we would be still fighting this city by city.
What was the term that you and the mayor had on the skiff stage? Not in my backyard, people, but what was the other phrase you guys
Which
used?
you have the not in my backyard people,
Yep.
or I think what did he say the cave people?
Yeah, cave people.
I can't remember what the acronym stood
Citizens
for. But
against virtually everything.
yeah, Citizens Against Virtually
Yeah.
Everything. That's
Yeah.
Mayor Rickman, the mayor of Columbia, South Carolina.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. For anybody who's made it through this entire podcast, number one, congratulations. I know I can tell stories. But number two, Will, you are absolutely incredible. You do such a great interview. And it's so wonderful that you're doing this because I think you're being great content and education to the people who are listening. And that point that you just made about the citizens against virtually everything drives home that need for our industry to really look at this more like, and maybe there's a better example than a chamber of commerce, but a unified coalition that is approaching this not as a fight, another element in this industry that really wants to promote that,
Yeah.
but more of a true thoughtful policy discussion, because those NIMBYs, those citizens against virtually everything, that's essentially what they are.
Mhm.
They're down at City Hall. They're active and engaged. They understand how City Hall works. They've got presence down there. The local elected officials know them, and they're able to make effective change just because they know how the system works.
Yeah. Yeah, very well said. And thanks for your nice compliments on the interview. Appreciate it. Matt, I want to give you the opportunity. If you had one place to send listeners, where would you want them to go if they want to connect with you, learn more, anything else? We're gonna link everything in the show notes, but if you had one spot, top ranking, where would you send people to go to?
I'll be honest with you. I'll give me an opportunity to promote myself. I think I'd be a bad business person if I didn't do it. But Smart City Policy Group is a great place to go. Prior to COVID, we're putting on in-person summits on short-term rental regulations, smart city policy summits, and
Mm.
then move to virtual. And look like we'll be pivoting back to in-person again. But there's great content there for people to learn and for people to educate themselves on how to approach this issue. And at the end of the day, I still view myself as a public servant, even though I'm not, effectively a public servant anymore in a traditional sense. I still view myself that way. And so I invite people to give me a call. I'm always happy to help. Certainly have done it, I hope, well for the last 15 years. And so they can always find me through that website, smartcitypolicygroup.com.
Perfect. I love it. We'll make sure everything's in the show notes. Again, thank you so much, Matt, for joining me on the show. Super appreciate all that you do, all that you shared with me on and off screen. I honestly get blown away, and especially at Skipped. I just remember you guys on stage, and I was like, that's the conversation we need to be having. So thank you again for all the Slick Talk listeners, all you Slick Talkers out there. Grab the links in the show notes, follow Matt, get involved, educate yourself, and you know what to do. We'll see you guys again next week. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you to our show partners for making Slick Talk, the hospitality podcast, possible. We hope you enjoyed the show, and we would love to connect with you outside of the podcast. So you can follow us on all of our social media channels for daily hospitality content, or find us on slicktalkthepodcast.com. And don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe so you never miss an episode. I'm your host, Will Slickers, and we will see you guys all again next week.